scripts we tell ourselves determine the stories of our lives. You see, we're doing this series because in life we can often give a huge amount of weight and think a lot about the words that people say to us. It is often the words that we tell ourselves that can have the most profound impact on our lives, because the scripts you and I tell ourselves, they really do determine the story of our life. Last week we looked at the script of the finger pointer and we flipped that script to becoming the overcomer. Today we've got a brand new script. As we're going through this series, we're going to start each week by looking at a destructive, a harmful script, and then we're going to flip it and say, how do we turn that into a positive, a helpful, a meaningful script, a constructive script for our lives. And the script that we're looking at today, I've titled the avoider. The avoider. And the reason I've called it the avoider is because the script that we're talking about today is the person that would say, man, it's not my responsibility. Now, this script is a whole lot harder to see than the script last week. I think this one, you've got to think a little more. You've got to be a little bit more self-aware to see when you're coming to the script, when you're using the script, it's not my responsibility. And the reason this one is so hard to see sometimes is because often the words that come out of our mouths might not be, it's not my responsibility. But the avoider is someone who avoids doing good in order to keep themselves protected. The person who doesn't want to put their head out from behind the barrier because they're scared of getting shot. The classic example of the avoider is this. It's the person who sees the schoolyard bullying going on. It's the person who sees that other person being bullied by an individual, by a group of people, who sees that it's going on, who knows they should do something, who feels something on the inside that says, I should go and stand up for this person, I should get involved, but at that moment decides no and just walks on by and lets the bullying keep happening and says, hey, it's not my responsibility to get involved, I'm just going to keep going. But you see, that isn't just an example that happens in the schoolyard, is it? It happens in workplaces. It happens in sports teams. It happens everywhere we go, where we see something happening to someone and we have got the opportunity to actually step in and do good, but we're too scared of how others might perceive us. We're too worried about what others might think about us. So we say, hey, this is not my responsibility, and we just keep on going. I love this quote from Albert Hubbard, who says, to escape criticism, do nothing, say nothing, be nothing. And oftentimes in life, so we don't get criticized or we don't have other people look down on us, it's so much easier to do nothing, to say nothing, and to be nothing. But when it comes to the story that we want to tell about our life, I don't think this is the story that God had in mind for us. He doesn't want us to be people who do nothing, who say nothing, or be nothing. No. I think He wants us to be people who do something, who have got the willingness to say something, to become something. Because He wants us to make a difference. He wants us to impact the world in which we live. So when we talk about the avoider, their script, it's not my personality. I've picked out a Bible character that illustrates this so well, called Pilate. And I have to admit, this is quite an extreme example, but I think it really helps us see firsthand how dangerous it is for you and I to become the avoider. And when we tell ourselves the script over and over, it's not my responsibility, it's not my responsibility, we very much do become the avoider. Now we can learn about Pilate in the Bible. There's 4 accounts of Jesus' life: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. All of them talk about Pilate because Pilate really has a central role. Pilate is the governor who sentences Jesus to be crucified. He has a big role in the death of Jesus Christ. He appears in all 4 of the accounts of Jesus' life. They're all fairly similar, but what I'm going to do is just dive into 2, because I think these 2 kind of cover it really well and have a slightly different wording, slightly different perspective on what goes on. We'll start with Luke's account. And what Luke tells us is really that there's 3 times where Pilate talks to the crowd about Jesus. And what makes this so remarkable, as we'll see as we read through this account, is Pilate knows that Jesus is innocent. Pilate knows that Jesus doesn't deserve to be crucified, yet he refuses to do something when he has the power to do something because he wants to escape criticism, and he does what he can to avoid responsibility. Let's go through this. We're going to start in Luke chapter 23, verse 4. Then Pilate announced to the chief priests and the crowd, "I find no basis for a charge against this man." So there's the first time Pilate says, "I find no basis for a charge against this man." What Pilate does then is he then sends Jesus off to appear before Herod, because Pilate's trying to escape responsibility. So he sends him to Herod to say, "Hey, can you have a look at this case and make a decision?" Herod sort of keeps his hands clean, sends him back to Pilate. So Pilate calls together the chief priests, the rulers and the people, and he says to them, "You brought me this man as one who was inciting the people to rebellion. I have examined him in your presence and have found, again, no basis for your charges against him." And he says, "Hey, neither has Herod, for he sent him back to us. As you can see, he, being Jesus, has done nothing to deserve death. Therefore, I will punish him and release him." But the crowd keeps saying, "Crucify him, crucify him, crucify him, crucify him." So for the third time, Pilate speaks to this crowd. "Why? What crime has this man committed? I have found in him no grounds for the death penalty. Therefore, I will have him punished and then release him." But with loud shouts, the crowd insistently demanded that he be crucified, and their shouts prevailed. So Pilate decided to grant their demand. He released the man who had been thrown in prison for insurrection and murder, the one they asked to be released, and surrendered Jesus to their will, surrendered Jesus to be crucified. See, here we have Pilate, who has got this opportunity to step up, who's got this opportunity to do good, who's got this opportunity to hammer home the reality that Jesus has done nothing wrong and he shouldn't be crucified. And yet what does he do? He says, "Hey, this is not my responsibility," and he hands Jesus over to be crucified. It's absolutely remarkable. What makes this even more interesting is we're told that before Pilate even goes and speaks to the crowd, his wife comes to him and says, "Pilate, I have had a dream last night. You cannot hand Jesus over to be crucified." And yet he still does. I wouldn't want to be in his shoes when he goes home that night, because you know what they say about a happy wife, right? So he is in deep, deep trouble at home, yet he wants to pacify. He wants to keep the crowd on side. So he does something he knows is wrong. He does something he knows he shouldn't do. He does something that is just, man, so bad. He sends Jesus to be crucified. I like the account in Matthew. Matthew talks about this. He uses some language, I think, that can help us today. Here we go, here. Pilate saying, "What shall I do then with Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" Pilate asked. They all answered, "Crucify him." "Why?" responded Pilate. "What crime has he committed?" But the crowd shouted louder, "Crucify him, crucify him, crucify him." When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, this is the key part, he took water and he washed his hands in front of the crowd. He washed his hands with this water. "I am innocent of this man's blood. It is your responsibility." Here we see the script coming through so clearly. It's not my responsibility. Pilate knew he was doing something wrong, but what does he do? He tries to avoid doing anything. He washes his hands in front of the people to show, "Hey, look, this is not my responsibility. I'm simply doing what you want." And this is a really interesting to grapple with, because on one hand we see Pilate, who's the ultimate decision maker here, that he is the one who has got control over the justice system. He is the one that can release Jesus, he is the one who can punish Jesus if he finds him guilty. And even though he has got the final say in the justice system, he doesn't actually do what is just in this case, because he knows Jesus is innocent, yet he sentences him to death. And we might say, well, Herod isn't fulfilling his responsibilities. He is not doing what's asked of him. But I think you could flip this around a little bit and you could argue, actually, Herod is doing what's asked of him. Because one of Herod's jobs is to ensure that justice prevails and that that there's a sort of a system, a legal system in place that's upheld, that punishes the right people, that makes sure innocent people aren't punished. But at the same time, Herod's greater responsibility, you could say, is to keep peace in the region. That Herod has got very much a vested interest in ensuring that there is peace in the region. Because as soon as there is no peace, Rome's going to come to town. Rome's going to do what Rome does. They're going to kick him out. They're going to put a new governor in place. So his job really is to ensure there's peace in the region. And by sending Jesus to his death, he is ensuring there's peace, because it's the crowd, it's the people that want Jesus crucified. And so we have Pilate in this place where he's got a big level of responsibility on his shoulders by the nature of his role. Yet when he has to take responsibility for a decision, what does he do? He becomes the avoider. He washes his hands of responsibility and says, man, I'm going to do what you want, rather than doing what is right. And that is the danger that you and I face. This is why the script is so important that we see it, because what's so easy for you and I to do is to wash our hands of responsibility. See, I'd say it this way. You know you're an avoider when you're washing your hands of responsibility for doing what's right. You know, and I know, we are being the avoider when we have the opportunity to do what's right, but we wash our hands of that responsibility. We say, hey, it's not just me. And as we might say something like, hey, well, everyone else is doing it, so I'm going to do it too, and I'm washing my hands of responsibility. It might be, no one else is stepping forward, so I'm not going to step forward either, and we wash our hands of responsibility. It might be when we know we should go and help that person, like that example earlier, but we just refuse to, and we wash our hands of responsibility because we say, if it's not really my job to help the person, I don't know him, I don't know her, why should I stick up for him, why should I stick up for her? And it's so easy for us to wash our hands of responsibility. And the reason we try and wash our hands of responsibility, and we say, hey, it's not my responsibility, is because you and I, we want to remain innocent. We want to be someone that others can't point their finger at and say that you've done wrong. And what can happen is we can spend our whole life trying so hard not to do anything wrong that we never actually get around to doing anything right. We spend so much time and energy doing all we can to stay on the right side of not doing wrong that we never actually do right. We never actually do good. And if we simply go through our whole life not doing any wrong, that doesn't make us a good person. It just makes us a not wrong person or a not bad person, doesn't it? Because there's a big difference between not doing wrong and doing what is right or doing what is good. And the last thing I think we want to spend our life doing is spending all of our time focusing on what's not bad or what's not wrong, rather than, I think what we should be doing is spending our time focusing on what is good. How much of our life should we spend trying to do good versus not doing wrong? So I think when it comes to our Christian faith, how many of us spend so much time trying not to do something wrong that we never actually go and do something that's right and meaningful? Because what is it that really captures people's attention? It isn't the fact that they see us doing nothing wrong. It's when they see us doing something right. You see, you understand how many of us go through our whole Christian life and think, man, okay, I'm just not going to go and get drunk, and that's going to make such a big difference because people are going to see me not getting drunk. I mean, no one's probably going to care too much. I might ask you a couple of questions, have a little laugh about it, but it's not really going to make a big difference. Or people might see you, man, not sleeping around and doing all you can to pursue purity because that's what God's called us to. And so we're doing this, and that's not going to lead other people to faith. It might get them to ask us a couple of questions, but man, it's when we actually go and do something good. It's when we step out and do something for someone else, when we do something meaningful that it causes others to look at us and say, hey, what is it about you? Why do you do that? Why do you treat those people so well? How come you're so kind in every single situation? How come you give every person you meet so much dignity? But when we actually do good, it's what causes other people to look in. And when we're an avoider, what we do is we spend all our time washing our hands of responsibility. We spend all of our time trying to avoid doing wrong. But I think it's much better if we can flip the script here. We want to flip the script. And instead of saying, man, it's not my responsibility, what is a better script for us? A much better script is this. This may not be my responsibility, but I can always do good. This might not be my responsibility, but I can always do good. It might not be my responsibility to get involved in that situation, but I can always do good. It might not be my responsibility to ensure that person's got petrol in their car, but I can always do good. It might not be my responsibility to help out in the office in this particular way, but I can always do good. We can take responsibility even if it's not our responsibility. We can always, always, always do good. So think about Pilate for a moment. Just think about how different we would look at Pilate and would view Pilate. And I suggest even celebrate Pilate today if he had done what was right, if he had done what was good. Now, imagine the same scenario took place and the crowd saying, crucify him, crucify him, crucify him. And Pilate says, no, this man is innocent. I will not let him be crucified on my watch. Not while I'm governor, not while I'm in control. We are not crucifying one innocent person. Imagine if Pilate put his stake in the ground, he drew a line in the sand and said, I'm not doing this. What do you think would have happened? I'd say there's a high chance that Pilate might have lost his own life. I'd say if Pilate really drew that line in the sand, given that the crowd was forming and there was such a mob mentality going on, something really bad could have happened in the area, something really bad, likely even Pilate would have lost his life. But imagine the stories that would be told about Pilate. See, nowadays, and in the lead up to Jesus' death, there's certain things that Christians right around the world celebrate, special days that have meaning, some more for others than some. But like Lent is a 40-day period where people sort of sacrifice something for 40 days in order to turn their attention to faith and to understand what it feels like to suffer a little bit. There's Palm Sunday, which is celebrated a week before Easter because it signifies Jesus coming into Jerusalem, where the people would lay the palm trees down or the palm leaves down on the ground before Jesus came into town. There's Good Friday, the day that Jesus goes onto the cross. There's Easter Sunday, the day they celebrate the resurrection of Jesus Christ. But imagine if Pilate had refused to crucify Jesus. Would Jesus have still ended up being crucified? Yes, because that was the purpose for which he came. They would have found a way for Jesus still to be crucified. I can assure you that was the purpose of Jesus' life. But if Pilate put a line in the sand, if he said there's no way this is happening on my watch, I think one of those days that we celebrate will be a day named after Pilate. The day when Pilate was willing to stand up to the crowd. The day when Pilate refused to do wrong. The day when Pilate sacrificed so much in order to do what was right, in order to do what was good. I think he'd be held up as one of the heroes of our faith if Pilate had the courage to do what he knew he should do and not send an innocent man to his death. But Pilate didn't do that. Pilate chose to follow the crowd. He chose to wash his hands of responsibility. And now when we talk about Pilate, he is seen as a coward in the Christian story, isn't he? But what would it look like for us to take the script? As Pilate could have, and his story would have been so different. If instead of having the script of it's not my responsibility, he had the script of this may not be my responsibility, but I can do good. See, I've called this person an activist. Called this person an activist. If you can have the script, this may not be my responsibility, but I can always do good. I think that's the message of an activist. And the reason I've labeled it this is because oftentimes when one person steps out and does good, a whole lot of others fall in behind them. When you step out first, others fall in behind them. It's called the bystander effect. When one person comes out and does good, others start to step out and do good too. That one person's confidence, that one person's willingness to step out first is often enough to bring a whole lot of other people with them. And when you and I can say, hey, it's not my responsibility, but I can always do good, I think we can start to see incredible change happen around us because our willingness to go first. And I've changed the pattern a little bit because I want to look at two examples today. Two examples that I just think are so profound of someone who could have easily said, this is not my responsibility, but I'll always do good. Both of them involve sort of a young, most likely teenage girl. We'll talk about Esther first, and then we'll talk about a young slave girl. If you want to read all of Esther's story, the way to do that is there's a book in the Old Testament called Esther, and that tells us Esther's entire story. Esther, she became queen. In fact, She was part of the very, very first edition of The Bachelor, because the King Xerxes at the time had his wife banished from being queen. She was married to him, but she refused to do something he asked in front of a whole lot of others. And all the other guys said, hey, king, you have to do something. You have to punish her. Otherwise, we're going to have women all over the kingdom standing up to their husbands. Women just getting in their face. Other women refusing to do things because of her examples. You have to stand up and do something because we don't want our wives and other women in the kingdom to behave like that. So the king gave in, and he sent her away and kicked Queen Xerxes out. And then they decided, well, she needed a new queen. So they had the first edition of The Bachelor, which Esther won, and she got to become the new queen. So Esther was in this place where she now had everything going for her. There's nothing in the story that would suggest that Esther came from a privileged place. There's nothing that would suggest she came from a really poor or a place of poverty. So we'd probably just assume that she was an everyday girl until she got to become queen, at which point she would have had the world at her fingertips. She would have had people around doing whatever she wanted them to be doing. She could have gone anywhere, done almost whatever she wanted. So she got to a place of absolute privilege. And here she is as queen, as a person of absolute privilege, and she is confronted with a reality from her uncle, who comes to her and says, hey, look, one of the king's top people is passing a law that says all the Jewish people across all of the lands are to be killed. And Esther, you need to do something about it. In fact, what you need to do is you need to go and approach the king and ask him to change this edict, to remove this law. And this was a real problematic, because if Esther went to the king outside of her allocated time, she was facing the death penalty. So it's an interesting way when we look at the Western world in which we live today. But if Esther was to approach the king at the wrong time, and the king wasn't happy about her coming to him, she could not only lose her title of being queen, all the privilege that came with it, but she could also lose her life. Let's just jump into a couple of quick verses in Esther. We see some of this play out. This is the seriousness of what's going on. Mordecai is talking to Esther, and he says, if you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise from some other place. See what Mordecai is saying here? He's saying, Esther, if you don't do anything, deliverance, the Jewish people are going to be okay. That relief will come from somewhere else. This all isn't simply dependent on you. In a roundabout way, saying if you want to wash your hands of responsibility, you actually could. But you and your relatives will die. Then he says, who knows if perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai, go and gather together the Jews of Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will do the same. And then, though it is against the law, I will go to see the king. And if I must die, I must die. See, we see Esther here being that activist. It may not be my responsibility to go to the king, but I can always do good. And the good thing, the right thing to do in this situation is to lay aside my own personal safety, my own personal sort of regard for my own well-being, and go to the king, because someone has to stand up for this entire people group, and I am the best person to do it because I am the queen. It may not be my responsibility, but I can always do good. Even though I'm in a place of privilege, I can always do good. Even though it might cost me all my privilege and even my life, I can always do good. Okay, the second example is about a young slave girl. This young slave girl, she's sold into slavery. She is the opposite of Esther. She's got nothing going for her. The easiest way to explain this is actually just to jump straight into 2 Kings chapter 5. If you want to read this whole story, that's where it is, 2 Kings 5. I'm just going to pick out a couple of verses, and this is how it starts here. Now bands of raiders from Aram had gone out and had taken captive a young girl from Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. Do you know what this is saying? This is telling us that this group of people from Aram, they went into Israel, most likely under the cover of darkness in the middle of the night, and they took captive. They kidnapped this young girl. They broke into her house. They took her out of her bed. They threw her over the shoulder and they walked her out and they took her to a whole nother land. They took her over to Aram and they put her to work as a servant to Naaman's wife. How horrific, how awful, how bad has this girl's life been? She would have probably gone to bed that night. Maybe mum or dad gave her a hug, gave her a kiss, said her prayers, read her a story, tucked her into bed, put her to sleep, expecting her to wake up in the morning with that childlike enthusiasm for life. Yet through the night, she was taken, she was stolen, she was kidnapped, removed from her own family, taken away to a far off land, and then she had to become a slave. Think of how horrific, how tough, how difficult her life was. Think of all the reasons in the world she had to be upset, she had to finger point, she had to just give up on life. She had nothing going for her. Look what this verse continues. She said to her mistress, "If only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." See, what's happened is Naaman, the husband of the wife who this young girl is working for, has got a disease called leprosy. Naaman was a high-ranking military official at the time. He had a huge amount of respect, a huge amount of mana. He had a lot of power, a lot of control, yet he had leprosy. And then the problem with having leprosy was this was a death sentence. Leprosy wasn't something that you could recover from. In fact, leprosy was worse than just a death sentence. Because leprosy was contagious, you would often be sent away from your family, away from those who loved you, told to live out there as an outcast, away from everyone, and no one would want to come near you for fear that they too would get leprosy. So Naaman is in this place where he's got a death sentence, where he has got leprosy. And when this young slave girl who's had a horrific life, who has been stolen from her family, hears that Naaman has got leprosy, what does she do? She says, hey, he needs to go and see the prophet in Samaria who will be able to cure him. When she had all the opportunity to keep her mouth shut, but when she could have been thinking, he deserves leprosy. Not only does he deserve leprosy, but everyone in his family deserves leprosy. Not only does everyone in his family deserve leprosy, but everyone in the army deserves leprosy, because they were the ones who kidnapped me. They were the ones who stole me away from my parents, who I haven't seen, who I haven't heard from, who I haven't been able to communicate with for such a long time. They deserve leprosy because look at what they've done to me. But when she hears that Naaman has leprosy, she doesn't respond like that, does she? No. She doesn't say, oh, it's not my responsibility. I know how he could get fixed, but it's not my responsibility to tell him. So I'm just going to wash my hands and zip it, keep my mouth shut. No. What this slave girl does. And it's a pity we don't know her name, because she should be celebrated. She is one incredible person. She is an activist. She said, look, it may not be my responsibility to say something. It may not be my responsibility to help him find how he can get healed, but I can always do good. And despite all the bad that's happened to me, despite all the horrific things that have happened to me, despite the fact that, man, I shouldn't be treated the way that I've been treated and I shouldn't even be here, I can always do good. And what does she do? She does good. And says, Naaman, this is how you can get healing. If you want to see how that story goes, go to 2 Kings chapter 5. It's a goodie. All right, let's just compare these two for one quick moment. These two young females, Esther and the slave girl. We've got Esther, who was in a real privileged position. The slave girl, who was in an awful position. We have Esther, who had to risk her life. She really risked her life in order to do good. We had the slave girl who had absolutely no responsibility here. We have Esther, who didn't make the law. I didn't write the law. I had nothing to do with this law being passed. I can easily wash my hands of this. There's no responsibility for me. The slave girl, I didn't make Naaman sick. It's not because of what I've done that he is now sick. I've got no responsibility here. The Esther could have been silent. The slave girl could have been silent. Yet both of them refused to simply say it's not my responsibility and wash their hands of that. That they didn't want to say, I'm innocent in all this, I don't have to do anything. No. Both of them said, man, this is our chance to do good, despite these being situations that we didn't go looking for, despite these being situations that, man, where we might not want to be in, man, we can do good. Both of them said, this is not my responsibility, but I can always do good. And I'll tell you what, Tim, when we can get rid of the script that we often tell ourselves, it's not my responsibility, it's not my responsibility, it's not my responsibility, I'm washing our hands of it. And we can say, hey, look, it might not be my responsibility, but I can always do good. I'll tell you what, man, we set ourselves up to live the type of life that God wants us to live. And in a real simple way to remember it is just this: always do good. No matter the situation, always do good. I might be downtrodden and beaten. Always do good. I might be queen over everything. Always do good. I might be in a place of privilege. Always do good. I might be in a place without any privilege. Always do good. I'm at work. I'm at home. I'm at school. I'm here. I'm there. Always do good. Wherever you are, always do good. How powerful is this? Always do good. It might not be my responsibility to help, but I can always do good. It might not be my responsibility to get involved, but I can always do good. I might take some shots for stepping out, but I can always do good. This might cost me something, but I can always do good. We want to be the type of people that say, man, I'm always going to do good. You see, when we spend our time focusing on always doing good, we don't have to worry so much about this line about, am I going to do something wrong? No, I'm just going to always do good. And we'll end up with a life where we don't just simply point to all the things we didn't do, but we can actually start to point to all the good that we did do. See, so some people will be like, well, I don't know what good to do. What good should I do? And they spend all this time going, okay, well, what good has God got for me to do? Can I be real honest with you for a moment? I don't think God minds too much about what good you do as long as you do good. It's honestly amazing when you hear people sitting back not wanting to do anything. I don't want to get caught doing the wrong good. No, just start doing good. I think God will start to direct you and move you when you start doing good. It's a lot easier to turn a moving bus than it is to turn a stationary bus, right? Just start doing good and you'll find yourself moving more into the good that God wants you to do. I don't think God's ever we're ever gonna get in front of God and God's gonna say, well, what good did you do? And we list off some good things that we've done and God says, that's the wrong good. No. God will just be like, man, I'm so glad you did good. And also what I want you to understand is this. We're not talking about, man, we've got to always do good. I'm not encouraging you to go to the bottom of your to-do list that's already just growing exponentially and start adding more items. I've got to do good here. I've got to go overseas and do this. I've got to do this and start adding more good things to do. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying you've got to go to that already full calendar and create time blocks. You can say, oh, I'm going to go and do good. No. See, what's so interesting about all of these accounts that we've looked at, Pilate, Esther, the slave girl, all of them were just going through their normal life when they did good. Yes, to be fair, their lives were quite public, especially in Esther's case and Pilate's case. But they were just doing what was their normal day-to-day responsibility when they chose to do good. See, Pilate's responsibility was to be that person who was the decision maker, who was there to decide who gets crucified and who doesn't. He was just doing his job when he had the opportunity to do good. He didn't have to go looking for ways to do good. All he had to do was do good within the parameters of his life that he was already living. Esther was already queen. She didn't try and become queen so that she could change these laws around. No, she became queen, and when she was queen, she realized there was an opportunity for her to do good, and she did it. What about the slave girl? The slave girl didn't get up in the morning and cook everyone breakfast and wash all the dishes and then have like a half an hour where she sits down and goes, okay, what's some good that I can do today? And comes up with a list of good that she could do. She was just going about being a slave girl, doing what it was that slave girls did. And she saw the opportunity to do good. What we have got to do is we've got to train ourselves to say, how can I do good in every situation? Because oftentimes it's going to be the things that we see where we can take responsibility, but it's not our responsibility. But we can say, hey, it might not be my responsibility, but I can always do good, that we can step in and do some incredible good. The reason so many of us miss this, the reason why this script can be so hard to see, is because it's so easy for us to be so focused on what is our responsibility. We don't have eyes to see what's on the peripheral. We don't have eyes to see what's going on around us, ears to hear what's going on around us. And we never get the opportunity to do good because we're so focused, we're so structured, we've got so much like efficiency in our day and in our time that we can't deviate. But can I suggest, we can say, it might not be my responsibility, but I can do good. It might not be my responsibility, but I can go above and beyond. It might not be my responsibility, but I can help you move those boxes to your car. It might not be my responsibility, but I can help do those lawns. It might not be my responsibility, but I can make that meal. It might not be my responsibility, but I can help you across the road. It might not be my responsibility, but man, I can smile and show care. It might not be my responsibility, but I can put my arm around you and give you a hug. It might not be my responsibility, but I can send that encouraging message. It might not be my responsibility, but I can stand up for you when no one else is around. It might not be my responsibility, but I can make sure I always speak highly of people that are around me. It might not be my responsibility, but I can always do good. Always do good. And what's amazing is we see this come through so often in the New Testament. Let me take you to a couple examples. First one is Paul in the book of Ephesians. He says this: for we are God's masterpiece. You and I, we are God's masterpiece. He has created each of us anew in Christ Jesus so we can do the good things He planned for us long ago. Notice it doesn't say we've been created anew in Christ Jesus so we can avoid doing the bad things He didn't want us to do long ago. No, we've been created anew in Christ Jesus to do the good things that He created us to do. Why? Because God doesn't want us focused on not doing anything wrong. He wants us focused on how can we do good? How can we add value? How can we bring meaning to those that are around us? And He planned those things for us long ago. Jesus in Matthew, He says it this way: in the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. They've got to see your good deeds. It's not when they see you not doing wrong. It's when they see you doing good that they'll glorify our Father in heaven. It's when we do good that people start to say, who is this person? What's different about her? What's different about him? What's different about them? Is when they see our good deeds. And in the last passage is another few words here written by Paul, and we'll finish with this. He says this: let us not become weary in doing good. I once heard this thought on this little verse, and it says, if doing good was easy, then we'd never grow weary. If doing good was easy, we'd never grow weary doing it. But the reality is doing good isn't easy. Taking responsibility for things that you don't have to take responsibility for is difficult. It's taking on more than you have to. It's making you work harder. It can lead to you becoming weary. But he says, hey, let us not become weary in doing good, because if doing good was easy, we'd never become weary. He continues, for at the proper time, for most of us, we think the proper time is now, but that's not necessarily the proper time. But at the proper time, it implies that the proper time isn't now. In fact, it implies that proper time is going to come at some stage, but it's not now. We live in an age where we want instant gratification, but at the proper time means there's generally always delayed gratification, sometimes very delayed gratification. For at the proper time, we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Can I just pause for a quick moment? Because I know there's a whole lot of people watching this, a whole lot of people listening to this. And you've done good for a long time. And you're feeling weary. And you're feeling tired. And you're saying, come on, God, is it worth it? Come on, God, should I keep going? And you're tempted to stop. Can I say, don't stop. Don't stop. For at the proper time, we will reap a harvest. If what? If we don't give up. Come on, some of you feel like quitting right now. Don't quit. Don't stop. Don't give up. Keep doing good. You might be feeling weary. You might be finding it hard, but do not give up. Let's not become weary. Let's just keep going. Not in our strength, but let's call on Him for His strength to keep on doing good. Why? Because if we do, at the proper time, we will reap a harvest. And then it goes. Therefore, as we have opportunity, that's alluding to what we talked about before, but we're going to always do good. We don't have to create these extra to-do list items. We don't have to create all this extra time box to go and do good, and I'm going to do a do good project here and a do good project here and 3 good do good hours there. No. As we have opportunity, as we're going through our normal day-to-day life, let us do good to all people. Not people that have got the ability to do good back. Not people that are just like you. Not people that think like you. Not people that live like you. Not people that have got the same struggles as you. No. All people. Especially to those who belong to the family of believers. And I'll tell you why I think Paul has this line. Because he was remembering the new command that Jesus gave, right? This is my new command. That you are to love one another just as Christ loved you. We are to love one another just as Christ loved us. And that is how people will know that we are followers of Jesus. So let's flip the script. Every time you're tempted, every time I'm tempted, every time we are tempted to wash our hands of responsibility, and say, it's not my responsibility, it's not my responsibility, it's not my responsibility. Let's flip the script. It's not my responsibility, but I can always do good. It might not be my responsibility to do the vacuuming, but man, I've got a bit of time, I can do it. Let's always do good. It might not be my responsibility to stand up for that person, but I can always do good. It might not be my responsibility to help you with that workload, but I can always do good. It might not be my responsibility to get alongside you and care and show compassion, but I can always do good. Come on, let's be the sort of people that as we go through our lives, our antennas up, our eyes are alert, our ears are listening for opportunities to do good. Let's be people who always do good. Let me pray for you. Heavenly Father, I thank you so much that we can look through these examples of people who chose to do good. We thank you for these young girls and their willingness, one in that extremely privileged place and one in that just awful place. And yet both of them chose to do good. And we can celebrate them today because of their choice to do good. I think of that example of Pilate, and we can see what can come on the other side of choosing not to do good, of choosing to protect ourselves, of choosing not to stand up, that we could be labeled the coward, the villain in the story, when by just taking that level of responsibility, man, our stories can completely change. So help us have that script to say it's not my responsibility, but I can always do good. Father, I pray particularly today for people that might be feeling weary, for people that have been doing good and the weight of that is just weighing on their shoulders and they're like, I don't know if I can continue, I don't know if I can continue. Father, I pray you can help them to keep going. I pray you can fill them with the capacity to keep going. I pray you can help them put the right boundaries and the right stuff in place so that they can keep going. But Father, I pray that they won't quit because we're promised that we will reap a harvest, that they will reap a harvest if they just keep going, if they don't give up. So I pray, you've done so much already, I just pray they'll keep going so they can see that harvest. Father, I pray you'll give us eyes to see the good we can do around us and to help us do it. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen, 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 amen.